We moved back to my childhood home to save money, not to unearth ghosts. But on our first Saturday, my 5-year-old daughter pointed a small finger at the antique wardrobe in the guest room. "Don't open the locked one, Daddy," she hummed, her voice eerily casual. "Grandma said it's not for us." My mother had been dead for 2 years. Ellie had never met her, and just like that, the quiet lie of my entire life began to scream. The envelope on the kitchen counter was not bright red, but it might as well have been screaming. It was the third notice from the electric company, a polite but firm reminder that we were 2 months behind and that our service was scheduled for disconnection if we did not remit $214 by Tuesday. I stood in the center of our galley kitchen, the linoleum cold against my bare feet, staring at the paper as if my intensity could somehow change the numbers printed in black ink. The condo was quiet. It was a Saturday morning in Willow Bend, the kind of gray, overcast Midwestern day that made the beige walls of our rental unit feel even smaller than they were. Ryan was still asleep. He had picked up an extra shift at the warehouse the night before, trading his sleep for the overtime pay that would, in theory, cover the car insurance. That left me alone with the electric bill and the growing pit in my stomach that had become my constant companion since I turned 33 earlier this year. We were drowning. It was a slow, quiet drowning, the kind that happens to millions of people who did everything right but still found themselves treading water with lead weights tied to their ankles. We had degrees. We had jobs. I was a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm, and Ryan managed inventory for a regional supplier. On paper, we were the American middle class. In reality, we were one broken transmission or one sick child away from disaster. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned to see Ellie, my 5-year-old daughter, standing in the doorway rubbing sleep from her eyes. She was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with the faded astronauts, and her hair was a tangled halo of static. "Mommy, can I have juice?" she asked. I forced a smile, flipping the overdue bill face down on the counter. "Of course, bug. Apple or grape," she said, climbing onto one of the wobbly bar stools. As I poured the juice, my mind drifted to the phone call I had received 2 days ago. It was my father, Thomas. Since my mother, Marion, had passed away from a sudden stroke 2 years ago, Dad had been drifting like a ship without an anchor. He was 71, and while he was not frail, the silence of the big house on Elm Street was eating him alive. He had called to complain about his hip, about the gutters needing cleaning, and then, in a voice that tried too hard to sound casual, he had made the offer. "Why don't you kids come stay here for a while," he had said. "Just until you get on your feet. The house is too big for me. You could save on rent. Help me sort through your mother's things. I can't bring myself to touch the attic." I handed Ellie her cup. The offer was a lifeline. We paid $1,400 a month for this condo. If we moved in with Dad, even just for 6 months, we could pay off the credit cards. We could fix the car. We could breathe. But the thought of returning to that house made my chest tight. It was not that I had a bad childhood. I had been fed, clothed, and educated. But the emotional climate of the Hayes household had always been controlled, like a thermostat set permanently to 68 degrees. My mother had been the warmth, the laughter, the one who smoothed over the rough edges. My father was the structure silent, stoic, and fiercely private, without Mom. I wasn't sure if there was enough air in that house for all of us. Ryan shuffled into the kitchen 10 minutes later, looking like he had gone 10 rounds with a prizefighter. He kissed the top of Ellie's head and leaned against the counter next to me, eyeing the face-down envelope. "Is that the electric?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. I nodded. "Tuesday deadline." Ryan rubbed his face with both hands, the sound of his stubble scraping against his palms filling the small silence. "We should do it. Stella, we should take your dad's offer." "I know," I said, looking out the window at the parking lot. "It is just for a few months," he said. "We help him clean out the junk rooms. We get the house ready if he decides to sell. We save $6,000, maybe $8,000. We need this." I looked at him. I saw the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that never seemed to go away. He was right. We didn't have the luxury of pride. "Okay," I said softly. "Let's go home." The move took 2 weeks of frantic packing and one long, exhausting Saturday with a rented truck. The Hayes family home sat on a half-acre lot in the older, more established part of Willow Bend. It was a 2-story brick colonial built in the 1950s, sturdy and imposing, with ivy climbing the trellis by the front door and an oak tree in the front yard that cast long, reaching shadows across the lawn. Walking through the front door with a box of kitchen supplies in my arms, I was hit by the smell. It was a specific cocktail of scents that instantly transported me back to 1995 lemon oil, old paper, and the faint, ghostly floral note of my mother's perfume. It had been 2 years, but her presence was still woven into the curtains and the carpets. Dad was standing in the hallway, leaning on his cane. He looked thinner than the last time I had seen him, his gray cardigan hanging loosely off his shoulders. When he saw us, his face brightened, but his eyes remained guarded. "Put that down, Stella. You will hurt your back," he said, gesturing vaguely at the box. "Ryan can get the heavy stuff. I am fine." "Dad," I said, setting the box down on the entryway table. "How are you feeling today?" "Fine. Just the weather acting up in my joints," he said. He looked past me to where Ellie was bouncing on the balls of her feet, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "And who is this grown-up lady? This cannot be my granddaughter." Ellie giggled and hid behind my leg. "Hi, Grandpa." We spent the afternoon unpacking. The deal was simple, Ryan, Ellie, and I would take the upstairs master suite, which had been the guest quarters for years, while Dad stayed in the converted bedroom on the ground floor. He had moved down there 6 months after Mom died, claiming he couldn't handle the stairs, but I suspected he just couldn't bear sleeping in the room they had shared for 35 years. The house was cluttered. Not dirty, but full. My parents belonged to a generation that kept things just in case. There were stacks of National Geographic magazines from the 80s, boxes of holiday decorations that hadn't seen the light of day in a decade, and furniture that seemed to have grown roots into the floorboards. By late afternoon, Ryan and I were exhausted, but Ellie was wired with the excitement of a new environment. I was in the kitchen wiping down the cabinets when I heard Ryan calling me from upstairs. "Stella, you might want to come see this." There was a tone in his voice, not alarm, exactly, but a strange curiosity that made me drop the sponge and head for the stairs. I found them in the spare bedroom at the end of the hall. This room had been my mother's sanctuary. She called it her sewing room, though she rarely sewed, mostly. She sat in here to read or write in her journals. It was the one room in the house that felt entirely hers, separate from the business of the family. Ryan was standing in front of a large, imposing wardrobe tucked into the alcove on the far wall. It was a beautiful piece of furniture, dark walnut with intricate carving along the top molding. It looked heavy, ancient, and out of place among the lighter, more modern bookshelves Mom had installed. Ellie was sitting on the floor nearby, arranging her stuffed animals in a circle. "What is it?" I asked, stepping into the room. "This thing," Ryan said, tapping the wardrobe. I was trying to make space for the winter coats, but the design is weird. Look. He pulled on the 2 large lower drawers. They slid out smoothly on well-oiled tracks, revealing empty space lined with cedar paper, but then he pointed to a smaller square compartment located right in the center of the unit. Nestled between the drawers and the main cabinet doors, it had no handle, only a small tarnished brass keyhole. "It is locked," Ryan said, "and there is no key. I tried the one for the bedroom door, but it is too big." "It is probably just stuck," I said, walking over to inspect it. I ran my fingers over the wood. It was cool and smooth. The brass plate around the keyhole was worn, as if many fingers had touched it over the years. "No, it is definitely locked," Ryan said. He gave the edge of the compartment a tug with his fingernails. "It didn't budge. It feels solid. I wonder what your dad keeps in here." I shrugged. "Probably nothing. Mom likely lost the key 20 years ago. You know how she was with small things." I turned away, ready to go back downstairs and start dinner. The wardrobe was just another old thing in a house full of old things. That was when Ellie spoke. She didn't look up from her stuffed rabbit. She was adjusting its ears with precise, focused movements. Her voice was light. Sing-song. Utterly casual. "Don't open the locked one. Daddy, Grandma said it is not for us." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. Ryan froze, his hand still hovering near the brass keyhole. I felt a cold prickle start at the base of my neck and slide down my spine. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I looked at my daughter. She was humming a quiet tune now, completely absorbed in her game. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ellie." She looked up, blinking her big hazel eyes. "Yes, Mommy. What did you just say?" "Sweetie, about the box." She pointed at the wardrobe. "Grandma said we are not supposed to open the locked one. She said it is for the grown-up secrets." Ryan and I exchanged a look. He looked as baffled as I felt. "Ellie, honey," I said, kneeling down next to her, "Grandma Marion went to heaven before you were born. You never met her. Remember, we look at her pictures in the album." Ellie frowned, looking confused. "I know. But she told me." "When did she tell you?" Ryan asked, his voice gentle but tight. "Just now," Ellie said, shrugging. "She talks sometimes. She said the locked one is bad." She turned back to her rabbit, dismissing the conversation as if we were discussing the weather. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I was a rational woman. I believed in science, in logic, in things I could touch and see. I did not believe in ghosts. I knew that children had active imaginations, that they absorbed information from overheard conversations and television shows and reassembled them into strange, fantastic narratives. Maybe she had heard me talking about Mom. Maybe she had seen a movie where a grandmother spoke to a child, but the phrase stuck in my head like a splinter. "It is not for us." It sounded so specific, so territorial. "Let's go downstairs," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Dinner is almost ready." Ryan didn't argue. He stepped away from the wardrobe, giving it one last, wary glance, and scooped Ellie up into his arms. As we walked down the hallway, I couldn't help but look back. The spare room was dark now, the shadows lengthening in the corners. The wardrobe stood in the alcove, a dark, silent sentinel. I had the distinct, irrational sensation that it was watching us go. Dinner that night was a quiet affair. I had made a pot roast, one of Dad's favorites, trying to bridge the gap between us with comfort food. We sat at the long dining room table, the four of us clustered at one end, the empty expanse of mahogany stretching out towards the darkened living room. Dad ate methodically, cutting his meat into precise squares. He asked Ryan about the warehouse, asked about Ellie's preschool, but the conversation felt forced. It was the polite chit-chat of strangers sharing an elevator, not a family reunited. I waited until the plates were cleared and Ellie was in the living room watching cartoons before I brought it up. "Dad," I said, pouring him a second cup of decaf coffee. We were upstairs in Mom's old sewing room. He stiffened. I saw it happen, a subtle tension in his shoulders, a tightening of his jaw. He didn't look up from his cup. "Oh," he took a sip. "I told you, there is a lot of junk up there. Just box up what you don't want, and we will donate it." "It is about that big wardrobe," I said, "the walnut one." Dad set his cup down. The ceramic clinked loud against the saucer. "What about it?" "It has a locked compartment," Ryan added, leaning forward. "We were just wondering if you had the key. We wanted to use the space for storage, but we can't get it open." Dad waved a hand dismissively. "That old thing, I don't know where the key is. Probably lost it years ago. Just leave it alone. It is a nice piece of furniture." "Thomas," Ryan said pleasantly, "it would be a shame to leave it unusable. If you want, I could pop the lock. It wouldn't be hard to—" "No." The word was sharp, almost a bark. Dad looked at Ryan, his eyes hard. "Do not break the lock," he said, his voice lower now. "It is an antique. Your mother loved that piece. I don't want it damaged." It was an overreaction. I knew my father. He was a practical man. He didn't care about antiques. He cared about function. If a drawer didn't open, he was the type to force it or fix it, not enshrine it. "Dad," I said gently, "it is just a drawer." Ellie said something strange about it, and it kind of spooked us. Dad's gaze snapped to me. "What did she say?" "She said Grandma told her not to open it," I said, watching his face closely. "She said it wasn't for us. For a second. Just a fraction of a second." I saw something raw in my father's eyes. It looked like fear. Pure, unadulterated panic. Then the mask slammed back down. He scoffed, picking up his napkin and wiping his mouth. "Children say foolish things. Stella, you shouldn't indulge that kind of nonsense. Your mother is gone. She is not talking to anyone about furniture." He pushed his chair back and stood up, wincing slightly as he put weight on his bad hip. "I am tired," he said. "I am going to turn in early. Leave the wardrobe alone. There is plenty of other storage in this house. Don't go digging where you don't need to." He walked out of the room without looking back. We heard his bedroom door click shut a moment later. Ryan looked at me across the table. "Well, that was weird," he said. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, that was weird." Later that night, after Ryan had fallen asleep, I lay awake in the master bedroom staring at the ceiling. The house settled around us with groans and creaks. The sounds of timber expanding and contracting in the night air. I couldn't shake the feeling of the evening. It wasn't just Ellie's comment. It was Dad's reaction. "Don't go digging where you don't need to." It triggered a memory, or rather, a sensation from my childhood. I had always known, growing up, that there were boundaries in our family that could not be crossed. There were questions you didn't ask. For instance, we never talked about my mother's parents, the Prestons. I knew they were wealthy, and I knew they lived in the state capital, only 2 hours away, but we never visited. I had met them perhaps 3 times in my entire life. Stiff, formal occasions where I was told to sit still and be polite. They had died when I was in college, leaving a vague, distant legacy that my parents never discussed. Then there was the timeline of my birth. I was born in 1992. My parents had married in 1991. But whenever I asked about their early years, about how they met or the days before I arrived, the stories were always thin. They lacked the texture of truth. Dad would say, "We were just working hard," and change the subject. Mom would smile a sad, distant smile and say, "You were the only thing that mattered, Stella." I had always accepted it as their personality. They were private people. They were not storytellers. But lying there in the dark, with the wind rattling the window pane, those old intuitions began to rearrange themselves into a new pattern. Ellie's voice echoed in my head. Grandma said it is not for us. Why did Dad panic? Why was he so adamant that we leave a single, small drawer locked? I got out of bed. Moving carefully so as not to wake Ryan, I needed water. I walked out into the hallway. The floorboards were cold under my feet. The house was pitch black, save for the moonlight spilling through the window at the end of the hall. As I passed the spare room, I stopped. The door was open a crack. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The wardrobe was a hulking shape in the darkness. I walked over to it, my heart beating a little faster than it should have. I reached out and touched the brass lock of the center compartment. It was cold metal. I gave it a gentle tug. Locked tight. I thought about my mother. Marion Hayes was a gentlewoman, a woman who baked cookies and volunteered at the library and smoothed my hair when I was sick. She was not a woman of secrets. She was transparent, kind, simple, or so I had always believed. I pressed my ear against the wood, feeling foolish, listening for, what a whisper, a clue. There was nothing but silence, but as I stood there in the dark, I realized that the silence was not empty. It was heavy. It was the weight of 32 years of things left unsaid. My father was hiding something. My mother had taken something to her grave. And my 5-year-old daughter, who had never known either of them in their prime, had somehow found the one loose thread in the tapestry. I pulled my hand back. "I'm going to find the key." I whispered to the empty room. I didn't know why I said it. It wasn't a promise of adventure. It was a statement of necessity. We had moved into this house to save our future, but as I looked at the locked drawer, I had the sinking realization that we were about to collide with the past. I turned and walked back to the bedroom, but sleep did not come for a long time. I lay there listening to Ryan breathe, thinking about money and trust, and the terrifying possibility that the people who raised you are just strangers with better disguises. The crack in the facade had appeared, and I knew, with a dread that settled deep in my bones, that it was only going to get wider. The attic of the Hayes family home was a time capsule that smelled of dry rot and cedar. It was a cavernous space that ran the full length of the house, with exposed rafters that looked like the ribs of a great wooden whale. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight that pierced through the circular window at the far end, illuminating a landscape of cardboard boxes, old lamps, and garment bags that hung like ghosts from the beams. I had been up there for 3 hours, tasked with the vague directive from my father to organize the chaos. Ryan had taken Ellie to the park to give me some quiet time, and Dad was downstairs in his recliner, ostensibly watching golf but likely napping. My job was to separate the trash from the treasure. Though in this house, the line between the two was often blurred. I had already filled 4 black garbage bags with moth-eaten blankets and broken holiday ornaments. But as I worked my way toward the back corner, under the lowest slope of the roof, I found something that made me pause. It was a plastic crate, the heavy-duty kind used for industrial storage, pushed deep into the shadows behind a stack of old window screens. Unlike the other boxes, which were haphazardly labeled in my father's scrawling block letters, this one had a single piece of masking tape across the lid. On it, in my mother's elegant, looping cursive, was written one word: reflections. The lid was taped shut with layers of clear packing tape, yellowed and brittle with age. It looked like it had been sealed with the intention of never being opened again. I sat back on my heels, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. My mother, Marion, had been a woman of open hearts and open doors. She was the kind of person who told strangers her life story in the grocery store line. The idea that she had a sealed crate, hidden in the darkest corner of the attic, felt fundamentally at odds with the woman I remembered. I ran my hand over the plastic lid. A strange cocktail of emotions swirled in my chest. There was grief, sharp and familiar, pricking at the back of my eyes, but beneath it was a thrum of voyeuristic excitement, and beneath that, a heavy layer of guilt. I felt like an intruder. I should ask Dad. I thought, but the memory of his reaction to the wardrobe stopped me. Don't go digging where you don't need to. If I brought this crate downstairs, he would likely tell me to throw it out without opening it. Or worse, he would take it into his room and I would never see it again. I made a decision. I grabbed the crate by its handles and dragged it across the floorboards, creating a low screech that made me wince. I maneuvered it down the narrow attic stairs and into the master bedroom, shoving it into the back of the closet behind my hanging clothes. It sat there for 2 days, a secret weight in the room, before I worked up the courage to open it. It was a Tuesday night. The house was quiet in the way only old houses can be, the silence layered with the settling of timber and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Ellie was fast asleep in her room, exhausted from a day of kindergarten. Ryan was downstairs watching a basketball game, the blue light of the television flickering against the hallway wall. I sat on the floor of the bedroom, the crate in front of me. I had a pair of scissors in my hand. I took a deep breath and drove the point of the scissors into the tape. It split with a sharp, tearing sound. I peeled back the brittle plastic strips and lifted the lid. Inside, neatly stacked in chronological order, were 25 notebooks. They were not uniform. Some were spiral-bound school notebooks with covers featuring kittens or geometric shapes. Others were leather-bound journals with gilt edges. Some were just composition books with the black and white marbled covers. I picked up the one on top. It was a floral journal. The cover faded. On the first page, written in blue ink, was the date, April 2022. This was the last journal she wrote before she died. My hands trembled as I opened it. I read through the entries, hearing her voice in every sentence. She wrote about her garden, about Dad's stubborn refusal to go to the doctor, about how much she missed me and wished I lived closer. It was mundane, beautiful, and heartbreakingly normal. I put it aside and dug deeper. I wanted to go back. I wanted to see the beginning. I reached for the bottom of the stack, a thick red hardcover notebook. The date on the inside cover read 1992, the year I was born. I opened it to the middle. The handwriting here was different. It was jagged, pressed hard into the paper, lacking the graceful loops of her later years. It looked like the writing of a woman who was writing fast, trying to get the thoughts out before they consumed her. June 12th, 1992. They came over again tonight. Arthur was wearing that suit, the one that costs more than Thomas makes in a year. He sat in our kitchen like he was afraid he would catch a disease from the formica. Elaine just cried. She keeps saying we are ruining the baby's future. They use that phrase 4 times, the baby's future, as if she is a corporation and not a person. Thomas held his ground, but I saw his hands shaking under the table. He is proud, but pride does not pay for a nursery. I am so tired of the fighting. I just want peace. I frowned. Arthur and Elaine, my grandparents, the Prestons. I knew there had been tension. I knew my father came from a blue-collar background. His father was a mechanic, his mother a waitress, while the Prestons were old money from the capital. But reading the raw anxiety in my mother's words made it visceral. I turned the page. July 4th, 1992. It is done. The deal is signed. I feel sick. I looked at Thomas tonight while he was sleeping, and I wondered if I even know him. He says we did it for Stella. He says we had to secure the capital to build something of our own, so we would never have to beg Arthur for a dime again. But at what cost? We traded her birthright for a startup loan. I promised Arthur I would keep the records safe, but Thomas made me burn the copies he found. I managed to save the originals. I have to hide them. If Stella ever finds out, it will break her heart, but maybe it will set her free. My heart hammered against my ribs. We traded her birthright for a startup loan. What did that mean? I kept reading, my eyes scanning the pages frantically. There were weeks of silence in the journal, and then a frantic entry dated 2 weeks after I was born, August 20th, 1992. Thomas is looking for the key. He tore the study apart today while I was nursing. He says he just wants to keep everything in the safe at the office, but I know he wants to destroy it. He wants to erase the Prestons from our lives completely. I cannot let him. That money, that land, it was hers. It was supposed to be hers. I hid the key where he will never look, because he never opens anything that does not belong to him. The wardrobe in the sewing room, the false bottom in the center drawer. God forgive me for the lies I'm telling my husband. I stopped breathing. The wardrobe, the locked compartment. I looked up at the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. I stood up, the journal still clutched in my hand. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I walked down the hall to the spare room. It was cold in there, colder than the rest of the house. The wardrobe stood against the wall, a looming shadow. I turned on the overhead light. The harsh yellow glare made the room feel interrogation bright. I walked over to the wardrobe and pulled out the large bottom drawer. It slid out with a heavy rumble. I set it on the floor. Then I pulled out the second drawer. The text had said, center drawer, but the center section was the locked compartment. There was no drawer there, just the door. I reread the entry. The false bottom in the center drawer. Wait, the center drawer. Not the compartment. I looked at the layout again. There was a wide, shallow drawer right in the middle of the unit, below the locked box and above the larger drawers. It looked decorative. Blending into the molding, I tugged on the handle. It was stiff. I pulled harder, wiggling it side to side, with a screech of dry wood. It popped open. It was empty, just bare wood stained with ink spots. I ran my hand along the bottom of the drawer. It felt solid. But then I pressed down on the corners. The back right corner gave slightly. I pushed harder. The thin panel of wood at the bottom of the drawer popped up on one side. It wasn't a solid piece. It was a fitted insert, my fingers shaking. I pried the panel up. Underneath, taped to the true bottom of the drawer with a piece of yellowed Scotch tape, was a small white envelope. I peeled it loose. The tape was so old it left a sticky brown residue on the wood. I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, and opened the envelope. Two things fell out. The first was a small, tarnished brass key. It looked simple, unassuming, the kind of key that opens a diary or a jewelry box. The second was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. It was a temporary bank card, the carbon copy kind they used to issue before digital printing became standard. It was from North Arden Community Bank. The name typed on the card was Thomas and Marion Hayes. The date of issue was August 15th, 1992, and written in pen in the corner was a box number 404. I stared at the date. August 15th. I was born on August 1st. This box was opened exactly 2 weeks after I was born. And the key. I looked at the brass key in my palm. Then I looked up at the locked compartment in the center of the wardrobe. I stood up and inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it. Click. The small door swung open. I held my breath, expecting. What gold bars? A confession letter. The compartment was empty. I felt a wave of confusion. I reached in, feeling around the back, the sides. Nothing, just dust. I looked back at the journal entry. I hid the key where he will never look. I managed to save the originals. I have to hide them. She hadn't hidden the documents in the wardrobe. She had hidden the key in the wardrobe, the key to the safety deposit box. The documents, the originals, she had saved from my father's burning spree, were in box 404 at North Arden Community Bank, and they had been there for 32 years. The next morning, the kitchen was bright and smelled of coffee and burnt toast. Ryan had left early for work. Taking the car, which left me alone with Dad and Ellie. Dad was sitting at the table, reading the local newspaper with a magnifying glass. He wore a flannel shirt buttoned to the chin. Despite the warm air coming in from the open window, I was making oatmeal for Ellie. My movements felt mechanical. My mind was racing, replaying the words from the journal. We traded her birthright. He wants to erase the Prestons. Dad, I said, keeping my back to him as I stirred the pot. He grunted. Turning a page, I was going through some old papers of Mom's. I lied. Just organizing things. I found a reference to a safety deposit box at North Arden Community Bank. The rustling of the newspaper stopped abruptly. I turned around, leaning against the counter. I tried to keep my face open. Casual. Did you guys have a box there? I asked. I was thinking about opening one for Ryan and me, for our birth certificates and stuff, and I wondered if the rates were good. Dad slowly lowered the paper. His face was a mask of stillness. The loose skin around his neck seemed to tighten. We closed that years ago, he said. His voice was flat. Oh, I asked. When? Long time ago. Stella. Before you were in high school. We didn't need it. Waste of money. He picked up his coffee cup, but his hand jerked, spilling a few drops of dark liquid onto the white tablecloth. He stared at the stain, his jaw working. Are you sure? I pressed. The note I found was dated pretty late. I said we closed it. His voice boomed in the small kitchen, making Ellie jump in her chair. She dropped her spoon, milk splashing onto her placemat. Dad's face flushed red. He looked shocked by his own volume. He took a shaky breath and lowered the cup. I am sorry, he muttered, looking away. I am sorry. Ellie, Grandpa is just... My head hurts today. He looked at me, his eyes pleading and hard at the same time. Stella, please, stop digging up the past. There is nothing in that bank. Just old tax returns and dust. We closed it. Let it be. He stood up, leaving his toast half-eaten. I am going to the garden, he said. I need fresh air. I watched him limp out the back door. His shoulders hunched as if carrying a heavy weight. He was lying. I knew it. I could feel it radiating off him like heat. Mommy? I turned to Ellie. She was watching me with wide, serious eyes. Is Grandpa mad? She asked. No, baby, I said. walking over and kissing her forehead. "He is just tired." Ellie nodded. She pointed a sticky finger toward the living room, where I had stacked a pile of manila envelopes from the office cleanout I had started yesterday. They were standard office supplies, yellow and boring. Grandma says the yellow envelopes made her sad. Ellie said, I froze. What I whispered. Ellie took a bite of oatmeal. The yellow envelopes. She said she had to put the truth in them, and it made her heart hurt. But she said you have the key now, so it is okay. I stared at my daughter. The morning sun caught the stray hairs of her ponytail, turning them to gold. She looked so innocent, so entirely removed from the dark current running through our lives. Ellie, I said carefully, did Grandma say where the envelopes are? Ellie shrugged. In the heavy room. The heavy room. Where the money lives, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The bank. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. My 5-year-old daughter, who had never stepped foot in North Arden Community Bank, who knew nothing of safety deposit boxes or trusts, was echoing the exact narrative I had pieced together from a dead woman's diary. I sat down at the table, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. I looked at the spill on the tablecloth where Dad's hand had shaken. It wasn't just a secret, it was a wound. A 32-year-old wound that had never healed. And now, it was starting to bleed. That night, the conversation with Ryan was different. Usually, we talked about bills. We talked about the car's transmission or the cost of Ellie's dance lessons. We operated in the realm of the practical, the immediate survival of our household. But tonight, sitting on the edge of the bed with the bedroom door locked, the atmosphere was conspiratorial. I showed him the journal. I showed him the key and the card. I told him about Dad's explosion in the kitchen and Ellie's comment about the yellow envelopes. Ryan sat in the armchair, turning the brass key over and over in his fingers. He didn't dismiss me. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. He looked serious. His brow furrowed. He lied to you, Ryan said quietly. That is the part I can't get past. If the box was empty, he would just say, Sure, go check. But there is nothing there. But he panicked. Exactly, I said, and Mom's journal. Ryan, she talks about a deal. She talks about trading my birthright for a startup loan. Ryan looked up at me. Hayes and Hart Logistics. What the company? Ryan said. Your dad and Aunt Colleen started it in the early 90s. Right, 1993. I said, the year after I was born. Ryan nodded slowly. You said your grandparents were wealthy. What if the startup capital didn't come from a bank loan? What if it came from you, from me? I shook my head. I was a baby. Trust funds. Stella, Ryan said, rich people set them up for grandkids all the time. If there was a trust for you, and your dad found a way to access it, he let the sentence hang in the air. It was a monstrous thought. My father was a man who clipped coupons. He drove a 10-year-old truck. He wasn't a thief. He wasn't a villain. But then I remembered the journal. He is proud. But pride does not pay for a nursery. Ryan handed the key back to me. You have to go, he said. To the bank. Yes. Tomorrow. Take your lunch break. Go to North Arden. See if the key works. See if the box is still active. But Dad said Dad is scared. Ryan cut in. And scared people do desperate things. We are living under his roof. Stella, if there is something in that box that changes who he is, or who you are, we need to know. He stood up and walked over to me, placing his hands on my shoulders. But listen to me, he said, his voice dropping low. Be careful. If you open that box, you might not be able to close it again. If this blows up, if it turns out he stole from you, we lose the house. We lose the relationship. We are back to square one. With nothing. I looked at the brass key in my hand. It felt heavy, heavier than lead. I know, I whispered. Ryan kissed my forehead. Just go to the bank, get the facts. Then we decide what to do. I nodded, clutching the key. The next day, I would go to North Arden Community Bank. I would walk into the vault, and I would find out if my entire life had been built on a foundation of theft. I put the key back in the envelope and slid it under my pillow. I closed my eyes, but all I could see behind my eyelids was the image of the wardrobe, the dark mouth of the lock, and the ghost of my mother whispering from the pages of a red notebook. Maybe it will set her free. Or maybe, I thought as sleep finally dragged me under, it will destroy us all. North Arden Community Bank sat on the corner of Main and 4th, like a fortress built to withstand a siege. It was a relic of a different era, constructed of gray limestone with heavy brass doors that required a firm shoulder to open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of floor wax and old currency. The silence was thick, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of a date stamp and the hushed murmur of tellers behind the glass. I walked in at 12:15, clutching my purse against my side as if I were carrying contraband. My lunch break was only 45 minutes, but the drive from the logistics center had taken 20. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back despite the air conditioning. In my purse, tucked into the zippered inner pocket, was the envelope containing the brass key and the temporary bank card from 1992. I felt like an imposter. I felt like a child wearing her mother's heels, playing a game she didn't understand. There was only one customer ahead of me, an elderly woman counting out singles. I tapped my foot, checking my watch. Every second felt like a countdown. Finally, the woman shuffled away, and I stepped up to the desk labeled Customer Service. The woman behind the desk was a fixture of the town, Mrs. Carlin. She had been working at this bank since I was in elementary school. She had the kind of helmet-stiff gray hair that never moved and bifocals suspended on a gold chain around her neck. She looked up at me, her expression professional but guarded. "Can I help you?" she asked. I cleared my throat. "Hi, Mrs. Carlin. I am Stella Hayes, Thomas and Marion Hayes' daughter." Her face softened instantly. "Oh, Stella. My goodness. Look at you. It has been years. I was so sorry to hear about your mother. She was a lovely woman." "Thank you," I said, trying to smile. "She was... What brings you in today?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the card and the key. I placed them on the polished wood of her desk. My hand was trembling slightly, and I hoped she wouldn't notice. "I found these while organizing my father's house." I said, "I know it is old, but I wanted to check if the box was still active. My father has been forgetful lately, and he couldn't remember if he had closed it out." Mrs. Carlin picked up the card. She adjusted her glasses and peered at the faded type. "Box 404, she read. "Thomas and Marion Hayes. August, 1992. She typed something into her computer. The clicking of the keys sounded like gunshots in the quiet lobby. I held my breath. "Well," she said, leaning back, "it is certainly not closed." My heart leaped. "It is open." "Technically, it is dormant," she corrected. "We have not had any activity on this box in quite some time, so it gets flagged, but the lease is paid up. Your father has it on an auto debit from his main checking account. It is a small fee, annual. Most people forget they are even paying it after a few decades. Paid up. That meant he knew. He had been paying for this secret every year for 32 years. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have the key. I would like to access it. Please, I just need to inventory what is inside so we can decide whether to keep it." Mrs. Carlin looked at me, and the warmth in her eyes cooled just a fraction. She looked down at the screen, then back at me. "I am afraid I can't let you do that." "Stella, why not?" I asked. "I have the key. I am their daughter. You are not a signatory," she said gently. "The box is in the names of Thomas Hayes and Marion Hayes. There are no authorized deputies listed. Since your mother has passed, the rights revert solely to your father. But I am her heir," I argued, feeling a rise of desperation. "I have her will. I am the executor of her estate. That applies to assets solely in her name," Mrs. Carlin explained. "But with a joint safety deposit box, the surviving tenant your father has full control. Unless you have a court order or a specific power of attorney granting you access to this box, I cannot let you into the vault. It is for your own protection as much as his." I stared at the brass key sitting uselessly on the desk. It was right there. The answer was 50 feet away, behind a steel gate, and I was being stopped by bureaucracy. "Mrs. Carlin, please," I said, leaning forward. "Dad is not in great health. He can't easily come down here. He asked me to check it for him." She smiled a tight, sympathetic smile. "Then he will need to sign a form in front of a notary authorizing you. Or he can come in with you. I can't bend the rules on the vault." "Stella, you know that." I slumped. I knew she was right. I knew she was just doing her job, but the frustration was a physical weight in my chest. I reached out to take the key back. As my fingers touched the cold metal, "Mrs. Carlin spoke again. "It is strange, though," she mused, looking at the screen one last time. "What is?" I asked. "You said he was forgetful, but the access log shows he, or rather, one of them was here not that long ago, in the grand scheme of things." I froze. When she squinted at the monitor, June 2010, 2010. I did the math instantly. I was born in 92. In June of 2010. I was 18 years old. I was graduating from high school. Who accessed it, I asked. Was it my father? "The log just says, lessee access," she said. "It doesn't specify which one, but that was the only time the box was opened in the last 30 years. It was opened when it was rented in 92, and then again in June of 2010. Otherwise, it has sat untouched." I stared at her. The date was too specific to be a coincidence. My mother or my father had come to this bank the month I became a legal adult. They had opened the box, either to put something in or to take something out, and then they had locked it again and never spoke of it. "Thank you, Mrs. Carlin," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I will talk to my father." I walked out of the bank into the bright, blinding sunshine of the afternoon, but I felt like I was walking into a cave. The timeline was tightening. The box wasn't just a repository for old papers. It was a time capsule set to trigger at specific milestones in my life: birth, adulthood, and now, death. I drove back to work, but my mind was useless for the rest of the afternoon. Spreadsheets blurred into meaningless grids. I kept seeing the date, June 2010, flashing in my mind like a neon sign. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the Hayes house that evening, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. Dad was on the front porch, sweeping leaves that weren't there. He moved with a jerky, agitated rhythm. I got out of the car. The conversation with Mrs. Carlin had hardened something inside me. I was done with the gentle approach. "Hey, Dad," I said, walking up the steps. He didn't look up. "You are late. Ellie has been asking for you. I had to run an errand on my lunch break." I said, "I went to the bank." The broom stopped moving. He stood there, staring at the porch planks. His knuckles were white on the handle. "I spoke to Mrs. Carlin," I continued, watching him closely. "She told me the box is active. She told me you pay for it every year, and she told me it was opened when I turned 18. Dad slowly leaned the broom against the railing. He turned to face me. His face was gray. His eyes sunk deep into their sockets. He looked old, older than his 71 years. "You had no right," he said. His voice was low, shaking with suppressed anger. "I had every right. I shot back. I found the key in Mom's things. She wanted me to find it. Why are you lying to me? Dad, what is in that box?" "Nothing," he shouted. The word cracked through the quiet evening air. A neighbor walking a dog across the street turned to look. Dad lowered his voice, stepping closer to me. "There is nothing in there that concerns you. Stella, it is old business, legal papers, debts that are paid. It is the past. Why can you not just leave the past alone?" "Because Mom wrote about it," I said, my voice rising. "She wrote that you made a deal. She wrote that you traded my future. She hid that key from you because she was afraid you would destroy whatever is in there." His face twisted. Your mother didn't know what she was talking about at the end. Her mind was going, "Don't you dare! I said, stepping back. Don't you dare write her off as crazy. She wrote that entry in 1992. Dad, she was sane. She was scared, and she was scared of you. Dad flinched as if I had slapped him. He looked at me with a mixture of heartbreak and fury that made my stomach turn. You think I am the villain, he said softly. You think I hurt you. I gave you everything. Stella, I worked myself into the ground for this family. I built a company from nothing so you could have braces, and college, and a wedding. And whose money did you build it with, I asked. The silence that followed was suffocating. He didn't answer. He didn't deny it. He just stared at me, his jaw working, his eyes wet. It doesn't matter, he whispered finally. It is done. It matters to me. I said, Mrs. Carlin said I can't open it without you. So we are going to go there, tomorrow, and we are going to open it together. I am not going anywhere, he said, turning back to the door. And if you keep pushing this, Stella, you are going to find things you wish you had left buried. You don't trust me. Fine, but don't come crying to me when the truth tears your life apart. He slammed the front door behind him. The sound vibrated through the porch floorboards, up through the soles of my shoes. I stood there for a long time, listening to the crickets start their evening chorus. He hadn't said no to the theft. He had only said the truth would hurt. That night, the house was a minefield. Dad stayed in his room. Ryan and I ate dinner in silence. The tension so thick, Ellie kept asking if we were in time out. After Ellie was asleep, I went back to the journals. I needed ammunition. I needed to understand the mechanics of the betrayal before I walked into that vault. I found the entry from 1993. It was written in black ink, the strokes heavy and angry. February 10th, 1993. The argument lasted 4 hours. Arthur threatened to sue. He stood in our living room, shaking his cane at Thomas, screaming about fiduciary duty. He knows Thomas moved the assets, but he can't prove it without the documents I hid. Thomas told him to go ahead and sue, that the scandal would ruin the Preston name in the capital. That shut Arthur up. They care more about their reputation than their granddaughter. I sat there holding Stella, covering her ears, wishing I could disappear. We compromised. I signed the amendment. I regret it every time I look at her. I signed away her freedom to buy my husband's pride. I turned the pages. Skipping ahead years, I needed to know about the box opening in 2010. I found an entry from May of that year, May 22nd. 2010. She graduates next month. She is so bright, so full of hope. She wants to go to art school. But Thomas says no. He says she needs a practical degree. He is terrified she will fail and need money. We can't give her money she should have had. We fought again last night. I told him we should give it back to her now. The trust matures when she turns 30. But we could tell her. We could explain. He refused. He said the business is leveraged too thin. If we pull the capital out now, Hayes and Hart collapses. He convinced me to go to the bank. We have to add the new amendment to the box. The one with the terrible signature. The one that shifts the beneficiary. I feel like a criminal. I am stealing from my own child to keep my husband's sinking ship afloat. A terrible signature. A shifted beneficiary. I closed the journal. My hands were cold. They hadn't just used the money to start the business. They had altered the trust to ensure the money stayed in the business. Even after I became an adult, and the terrible signature implied forgery. Had my father forged my grandfather's signature or my mother's? I needed legal advice. I couldn't navigate this on emotion alone. I grabbed my phone and went out to the back porch. The air was cool. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Jenna Rowe. Jenna and I had been roommates freshman year. She was now a junior partner at a firm in Carver Falls, specializing in family law and estates. She picked up on the third ring. Stella, is everything okay? It is late. I need help. Jenna, I said, I think my father might have embezzled my inheritance. I told her everything. The journals, the box, the confrontation, the specific dates. I spoke fast, purging the poison that had been building up for days. When I finished, There was a long silence on the other end. "Stella," Jenna said, her voice dropping into her professional register. "This is heavy. If what you are saying is true, we are talking about fraud, breach of trust, conversion of assets, potentially criminal charges, though the statute of limitations on the criminal side might be tricky. Civilly, though, you have a case. What do I do?" I asked. "He won't let me open the box. You need evidence," she said. "The journals are good for establishing intent and a timeline, but they are hearsay. You need the documents." "You said there was a Preston family trust." "Yes," I said. "My mother mentions it by name." "Okay. Trusts create a paper trail, even if the originals are in that box. There have to be copies, tax filings, bank records, correspondence. If your father has been running a business with trust funds, there are footprints. Do not confront him again yet. If he thinks you are about to sue, he might destroy evidence. You need to go on a treasure hunt. Find anything with the name Preston on it." "Okay," I said. "I can do that." And Stella Jenna added, "Be prepared. If you pull this thread, the whole sweater is going to unravel. If he used that money to build Hayes and Hart, and you sue for it back, the company could go under. You are not just suing your dad. You are suing the family business." "I know," I said, looking at the dark windows of the house. "I know." The next day was Saturday. Dad went to the hardware store in the morning. A ritual he never broke. It gave me a 2-hour window. I didn't go to the attic this time. I went to the basement. The basement was Dad's domain. It was where he kept his tools, his workbench, and the filing cabinets for the home office side of the business. It smelled of sawdust and damp concrete. I went straight to the filing cabinets. They were locked. Of course. I looked around. Dad wasn't a complex man. He hid keys in obvious places. I checked the top of the door frame. Nothing. I checked inside the coffee can full of nails on the workbench. There, buried under a layer of galvanized steel nails, was a small silver key. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the cabinet. It was packed tight with hanging folders. Tax, 1998. Invoices, 2004. Payroll. I flipped through them, my fingers moving fast. I was looking for Preston. There was nothing in the main sequence. I reached all the way to the back of the drawer. There was a flat manila envelope lying horizontally on the bottom of the cabinet, underneath the hanging folders. It had slipped or been pushed out of sight. I pulled it out. It was stamped in red ink. "Confidential," and written in pencil in the corner, "Preston Family Trust. Drafts." I opened it on the workbench. Inside were photocopies. They were grainy, clearly made on an old machine. I scanned the first page. Trust agreement, grantor Arthur Preston, trustee North Arden Community Bank. I flipped through the pages. It was legal jargon, dense and impenetrable. I was looking for the schedule of assets or the beneficiary designation. Page 4 was missing. Page 5 was missing. Page 6 was there. It detailed the administrative powers of the trustee. I cursed under my breath. The smoking gun pages were gone, but then I found a memo clipped to the back. It was a letter from a law firm in the capital, addressed to Thomas Hayes, dated 1992. Dear Mr. Hayes, regarding your inquiry about the restructuring of the Preston Trust assets. As we discussed, shifting the principal from the managed portfolio into a private liability company is highly irregular and exposes the trustee to significant liability. We cannot advise proceeding with the loan structure you proposed without the explicit written consent of the grantor. The beneficiary's interest must be paramount. The loan structure. He had tried to turn the trust into a loan to himself, and the lawyers had told him it was illegal, but he had done it anyway. I took a picture of the letter with my phone. I took pictures of every page in the file. My hands were shaking so hard the first few were blurry. I had to steady my elbows on the workbench. This was it. It wasn't the full picture, but it was the outline of the crime. He had sought legal advice on how to raid the trust, been told no, and then, according to Mom's journal, had bullied my mother into signing something that made it happen. I heard the rumble of the garage door opening upstairs. Dad was home. I shoved the papers back into the envelope, slid it under the folders in the drawer, locked the cabinet, and buried the key back in the nail jar. I ran up the basement stairs and was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone. By the time he walked through the door, he looked at me, his eyes suspicious, but said nothing. He just set a bag of birdseed on the counter and walked past me. Sunday morning broke with a violent thunderstorm. The sky was black, and rain lashed against the windows of the old house. We were eating pancakes. The mood was somber. Ellie was picking at her food, looking pale. She had woken up crying in the middle of the night, a high, thin wail that had sent me sprinting down the hall. She had calmed down quickly, but she had refused to tell me what the dream was about. Now, she looked up from her plate. Her eyes were dark and serious. "Mommy." "Yes, baby." "I had the dream again," she said, "about Grandma." The room went still. Ryan stopped chewing. I put my fork down. "What did she say?" "Elle," I asked gently. Ellie looked at Dad, then at me. She said, "You will see her face in the locked one." "In the locked one?" I asked. "You mean the box?" Ellie nodded. "She said you will see her face, but only when you are ready, not when Daddy is—" She pointed a syrup-sticky finger at my father. Dad dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china plate. He stared at Ellie, his face draining of color. "Stop it," he whispered. "Stop telling her these things." "Stella." "I am not telling her anything I said." Shocked. "She is dreaming." "Dad." "She is 5 years old," Dad shouted. Standing up, 5-year-olds don't say things like that. "You are feeding her lines. You are using my granddaughter to torture me." He was shaking. He looked terrified, not angry. Terrified. I stood up too, placing myself between him and Ellie. "I am not doing anything." "Dad, maybe you should ask yourself why your dead wife is haunting this house. Maybe she is tired of the secrets." Dad stared at me, his chest heaving. He looked at Ellie, who was shrinking into her chair, eyes wide. Then he turned and walked out of the kitchen. But he didn't go to his room. He went to the front hall closet. He grabbed his raincoat. "Where are you going?" I asked, following him. "To the bank," he said, fumbling with his keys. "It is Sunday. Dad, the bank is closed." "I don't care," he yelled. "I'm going to end this. You want to see, fine. We will go tomorrow. I will sign the damn paper, but leave Ellie out of it." He opened the front door and stormed out into the rain. He didn't get in his truck. He just walked out into the yard, standing in the downpour, looking up at the gray sky. I watched him from the window. He looked small. He looked defeated. Ellie's words echoed in my mind. "You will see her face in the locked one." What did that mean? A photograph? A painting, and when you are ready. I looked at Ryan, who was holding Ellie, comforting her. "I am ready," I said softly. I pulled out my phone and texted Jenna. "I have the proof. He agreed to go to the bank tomorrow. I am going to open the box." I looked back out the window. Dad was still standing in the rain, letting the water soak him to the bone, as if he were trying to wash away 30 years of dirt. But I knew, with a sinking certainty, that some stains don't wash out. They have to be cut out, and tomorrow, I was going to wield the knife. Monday morning arrived with the color of wet slate. The storm from Sunday had passed, leaving behind a damp, heavy humidity that made the air feel thick enough to choke on. I sat in my car in the driveway, the engine idling, talking to Jenna Rowe on the Bluetooth. "You have to push him." "Stella," Jenna said, her voice tinny through the speakers. I looked into the statute of limitations on fraud in this state. It is tricky. It usually starts tolling from the moment of discovery, which is technically now. But if he argues you should have known earlier, the clock is your enemy. Every day we wait is a day his defense team could use to say you sat on your rights. "I know," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "He promised he would go." "Promised isn't performed," Jenna countered. "Get him in the car. Get to the bank. And Stella, don't let him hold the bag." I hung up and walked back into the house. The kitchen was quiet. Ryan had taken Ellie to school already, sensing that the atmosphere in the Hayes household was too volatile for a 5-year-old. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table. He was dressed in his Sunday best, a charcoal suit that hung loosely on his frame, a white shirt that had been starched stiff, and a tie I hadn't seen him wear since Mom's funeral. He looked like a man waiting for a sentencing hearing. "Ready?" I asked. He didn't look up. He was staring at his hands, folded on the placemat. "You are making a mistake, Stella," he said quietly. "Then let me make it," I replied. "If there is nothing in there but old tax returns, I will apologize. I will never bring it up again, but we are going." He stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping against the linoleum with a sound like a shriek. He picked up his keys. "Fine," he said. "One last time. Then we are done with this." The drive to North Arden Community Bank was silent. The only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the tires on the pavement and the hum of the air conditioner. Dad stared out the passenger window. His jaw set so hard I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. When we walked into the lobby, Mrs. Carlin looked up from her desk. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Dad's suit, then flicked to me. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice pitching up into professional cheerfulness. "Stella, I assume you are here for the box." "We are closing it out," Dad said gruffly. "I want to empty it and terminate the lease." "Of course," Mrs. Carlin said. She grabbed a ring of keys and a clipboard. "If you will just sign the access log, I will take you back." Dad signed his name with a jagged, aggressive scrawl. I signed beneath him, my hand shaking slightly. Stella Hayes. It felt like I was signing a treaty I hadn't read. We followed Mrs. Carlin through the heavy steel gate and into the vault. The air inside was different, colder, filtered, smelling of money and dust. The walls were lined with hundreds of stainless steel drawers, numbered in black, 404. "Mrs. Carlin murmured, scanning the rows. "Ah, here we are." She slid her master key into the left lock. Dad stepped forward, his hand trembling as he inserted the small brass key into the right lock. "Turn together on 3, Mrs. Carlin instructed. 1, 2, 3. The locks clicked in unison. The sound echoed in the small metal room. Mrs. Carlin pulled the door open and slid out a long, gray metal bond box. It was heavy. She placed it on the small viewing table in the center of the room. "I will leave you to it," she said politely. "Just press the buzzer when you are finished." The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving us alone in the fluorescent silence. Dad put his hand on the lid of the box. "Stella," he said, his voice desperate. "We can just walk away. We can leave this here. Open it." "Dad," I said. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, with a sound like a deflating tire, he let out a breath and flipped the lid back. I had expected papers. I had expected dust. I had not expected the clutter of a life interrupted. Inside the box, resting on top of a stack of yellow documents, was a clear plastic bag containing a USB drive and an old mini DV tape, the kind used in camcorders from the late 90s. Taped to the cassette was a piece of masking tape with my mother's handwriting. "For Stella, if you are seeing this." I couldn't stay silent anymore. My breath hitched. I reached for the tape. Dad's hand shot out. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "No," he hissed. "That is mine. It has my name on it," I cried, trying to pull my hand back. "Let go. It is private. It is between your mother and me." He lunged for the box with his other hand, trying to scoop the envelopes and the tape toward him. "Stop it," I shouted. I shoved his shoulder. He stumbled back against the wall of safety deposit boxes. I grabbed the tape and the USB drive, clutching them to my chest. Dad lunged again, his face red and contorted. "Give it to me, Stella. You don't understand." I slammed my hand down on the buzzer on the table. It let out a loud, buzzing rasp. Dad froze. The door opened 2 seconds later. Mrs. Carlin stood there, looking alarmed. A security guard was behind her. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes darting between us. "My father is trying to take items that are addressed to me," I said, my voice shaking but loud. "I am an heir. This box is joint property. He cannot remove things without my consent." "Right, Mrs. Carlin looked at Dad, who was leaning against the wall, breathing hard, his tie askew. "Mr. Hayes," she said firmly, "Stella is correct. If there is a dispute over the contents, nothing leaves this vault until it is resolved. Or, if you are both present and consenting. You can take it, but you cannot physically take items from each other." Dad looked at the guard, then at Mrs. Carlin, and finally at me. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. He slumped, looking suddenly frail. "Fine," he whispered. "Take it. Take it all. God help you." We drove back to the house in a silence that was even heavier than before. Dad went straight to his room and shut the door. I could hear the lock click. I went to the living room and called Ryan. "Come home," I said, "now, and bring your laptop." 30 minutes later, we were set up at the dining room table. Ryan sat next to me, his hand on my knee. On the screen of his laptop, Jenna was connected via video call, her face serious and pixelated. I held the USB drive. The mini DV tape was sitting on the table, a relic, but the USB likely contained the digitized files. Mom must have had them converted before she died, or maybe during that 2010 visit. I plugged the drive in. A folder popped up labeled Truth. I clicked it. There was a single video file. I hit play. The screen filled with the image of my mother. She was sitting in the very chair I was sitting in now, in this dining room, but the wallpaper behind her was different, the old floral pattern we had stripped 5 years ago. She looked younger, her hair darker, but her eyes were tired, red-rimmed. "Stella," she began. Her voice coming through the laptop speakers made me jump. It was so clear. It was like she was in the room. "If you are watching this, then I am gone. And if I am gone, I can't protect you anymore. I can't protect Thomas anymore either." She took a deep breath, wiping a tear from her cheek. 32 years ago, when you were born, my parents, your grandparents, Arthur and Elaine set up a trust for you. It was substantial. They wanted you to have choices. They put land, stocks, and bonds into it. It was supposed to be managed by the bank until you turned 30. She looked down at her hands. "Your father, Thomas, he was struggling. He had big dreams for a logistics company, but no bank would touch him. He felt small. He felt like my parents owned him. He hated them for their money, and he hated himself for needing it. So he came to me. He told me that if we didn't get capital, we would lose the house. He said we would be destitute. He convinced me that the trust was just money sitting there doing nothing. He said we could borrow it, invest it in his company, grow it, and put it back before you ever knew." I felt Ryan's hand tighten on my knee. "I signed the papers," Mom said, her voice cracking. "I signed the amendment that moved the assets from the bank's control to a new entity, Hayes and Hart Logistics, Thomas and your Aunt Colleen. They took the land, the 40 acres off the interstate, and they transferred the deed. They promised it was temporary. But then the distribution center deal happened. A national retailer she named a massive big-box store chain wanted that land for a regional hub. It was worth millions. Hayes and Hart leased it to them. The company exploded. All that money, all that profit. It was built on your land, your trust. But the money never went back to you. Thomas said he couldn't separate it out. He said the company needed the liquidity. He said he was building a legacy for you anyway. So what did it matter on the screen?" Mom leaned closer to the camera. "But that is not the only reason he did it. Stella, there is something else. Something I promised I would never tell you. But you need to understand why he feels so entitled to that money." She paused. The silence on the recording stretched for 5 seconds. 10. "Thomas is not your biological father." The world stopped. I stared at the screen. The words didn't make sense. They were English words, but they didn't form a coherent sentence. "Thomas and I were separated for 3 months in 1991. Mom continued, speaking faster now, as if trying to get it over with. "I met a man in Chicago. It was brief. It didn't mean anything. But I got pregnant. When I came back to Thomas, I told him the truth. He agreed to take me back. He agreed to raise you as his own. to put his name on the birth certificate, but he had a condition. She looked straight into the lens, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. He said he would never raise another man's child on another man's money. He said if he was going to be your father, he had to be the provider. He demanded control of the Preston money. He said he wouldn't let my parents' wealth hold him hostage while he raised a child that wasn't his blood. It was his price. Stella. His price for being your dad. The video cut to black. I sat there, frozen. The air in the room felt vacuum-sealed. I looked at Ryan. He was pale, his mouth slightly open. I looked at the screen where Jenna's face was frozen in shock. Biologically. He is not my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, the man who walked me down the aisle, the man who was currently locked in his bedroom down the hall. It explained everything. The distance, the coldness, the fierce, possessive pride. He hadn't just stolen the money, he had exacted a tax. He had charged my mother a fee for his love. I reached for the stack of yellowed documents from the box. My hands were numb. I found the trust agreement. Preston Family Trust. Beneficiary. Stella Marion Hayes. I found the amendment, dated 1993. Assets transferred to Hayes and Hart Logistics, LLC. And at the bottom of the stack, I found a letter. It was handwritten on heavy stationery. The handwriting was shaky, spider-like. Dear Marion, it read, I am signing this because you say it will save your marriage. I am signing this because I am sick and I cannot fight Thomas anymore. But know this, he is a thief. He is stealing from a child to feed his own ego. I hope, one day, you make it right. Arthur. I pushed the papers away. I felt sick, physically sick. There was a noise from the hallway. I turned. Dad Thomas was standing in the doorway. He had taken off his jacket and tie. He looked small in his suspenders. His eyes were red. He looked at the laptop screen, then at the papers scattered on the table. You know, he said. His voice was a rasp. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Is it true? I asked. The biology. He nodded once, jerkily. I didn't know who he was, he said quietly. She never told me his name. Just some guy in a bar. So you made a deal, I said, my voice rising. You sold your acceptance of me. You charged her $2 million to be my father. It wasn't like that, he shouted. Stepping into the room, I was humiliated. Your grandparents treated me like dirt. They looked at me like I was the hired help. And then she comes home pregnant with another man's baby. And I'm supposed to just smile and take their charity, so you stole it instead. I invested it, he yelled, slamming his hand on the doorframe. I built something. Hayes and Hart supports 50 families in this town. I took that idle money and I made it work. And I took care of you. Didn't I? Did you ever go hungry? Did you ever want for anything? I wanted the truth. I screamed. I wanted to know that my college loans weren't necessary. I wanted to know that when I was eating ramen in a studio apartment, you were sitting on a gold mine that belonged to me. I was going to give it to you, he pleaded. When the business was stable, but then the market crashed in 2008, and then your mother got sick, and the medical bills. I couldn't pull the money out without bankrupting the company. I was trapped. Stella, I have been trapped for 30 years. He sank into the armchair in the corner, burying his face in his hands. I loved you, he sobbed. His shoulders shook. I loved you like you were mine. I forgot you weren't mine. But the money was the only way I could feel like a man in this house. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me, and I saw a stranger who had loved me. Yes, but a stranger who had built my entire existence on a foundation of fraud and resentment. Jenna's voice came from the laptop, soft but firm. Stella, she said, look at the documents, the amendment shifting the assets. It is witnessed by Colleen Hart. I looked down at the paper. There it was. Witness Colleen Hart, my aunt, his business partner. She knew. I whispered. She knew the whole time. Everyone knew. Dad whispered from the chair. Everyone except you. I looked at Ryan. He was standing now, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked ready to throw Dad out of the house, but I felt something else, a cold, hard clarity. I picked up the papers. I picked up the USB drive. "Get out," I said to Thomas. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Stella, get out of this house," I said. "Go stay with Colleen. I don't care where you go. But you can't be here tonight." He stood up shakily. He looked at me, searching for some sign of the daughter he knew, but I gave him nothing. I was a statue. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Just go," I said. He left. We heard the front door close, then the sound of his truck engine starting. I sat back down at the table. The silence in the room was deafening. "Jenna," I said to the screen. "I am here," she said. "How much?" I asked. "If we go after the company, if we go after the land, how much is it worth?" Jenna hesitated, based on the lease revenue for a distribution center of that size, and 30 years of compound interest and profits. She took a breath. Conservatively, $10 to $15 million, maybe more. But Stella, if you sue for that, Hayes and Hart will liquidate. The company will die. Your dad will be bankrupt. Your aunt will be bankrupt. I looked at the empty chair where my father had sat. I looked at the rental notice for our condo that was still in my purse. I thought about Ellie's shoes that were too tight. Draft the complaint. I said, "Stella." Ryan started. "Draft it." I repeated, "I want everything." I looked at the black screen of the laptop where my mother's face had been. She said it might set me free. I whispered. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the tail lights of my father's truck disappear down the street. But freedom, I realized, tasted a lot like ash. The silence in the house after my father left was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and loud with the echoes of 30 years of lies. I sat in the living room, the same room where I had learned to walk, where I had taken prom photos, where I had opened Christmas presents wrapped in paper bought with stolen money. It was 3 a.m. Ryan was asleep upstairs, exhausted by the sheer emotional gravity of the day, but I couldn't sleep. I walked around the ground floor like a ghost haunting my own life. I looked at the framed photographs on the mantelpiece. There was one of Dad and me at my college graduation. He was beaming, his arm around my shoulder, looking so proud. I remembered that day. I remembered him handing me an envelope with $500 in it, a graduation gift he said he had saved up for months. I had cried, touched by his sacrifice. Now, looking at that photo, I felt a nausea that started in my gut and radiated outward. He had saved $500, while sitting on an asset worth millions that belonged to me. The complexity of it was maddening. If he had been a monster, if he had been cold, abusive, or absent, it would have been easy. I could have hated him. I could have sued him and slept soundly. But he wasn't a monster. He was the man who made me soup when I had the flu. He was the man who taught me how to change a tire so I would never be stranded. He was the man who, according to my mother's confession, had swallowed his pride to raise another man's child, provided I came with a paycheck. Was his love real, or was it just a performance required by the contract? I picked up the photo frame and threw it into the fireplace. The glass shattered with a satisfying crash. But it didn't fix anything. The next morning, the reality of our situation set in with the rising sun. Ryan sat at the kitchen table, reviewing our bank statements. The numbers were bleak. We had less than $800 in checking. The rent on our condo back in the city was due in a week, and we were still locked into the lease even though we were living here. Jenna called at 10 o'clock. She sounded tired, like she had been up all night researching. "I have been going through the documents you scanned, Stella," she said, and I asked, holding my coffee cup with both hands to warm my cold fingers. "It is actionable," she said. "There is a clear breach of fiduciary duty. There is fraud. There is conversion of trust assets. The fact that Arthur Preston wrote that letter saying he was coerced helps us. But the real smoking gun is the timeline. They transferred the land to Hayes and Hart before the trust allowed. They stripped the asset. What does that mean for me?" I asked. It means you can sue for the current value of the assets, plus disgorgement of profits, she explained. That land is now a distribution center, the lease revenue alone over 20 years. Stella, we are talking about a judgment in the range of $12 to $15 million, maybe more with punitive damages. I looked at Ryan. He heard the number. His eyes widened. But, Jenna added, her voice dropping, you have to understand what this will look like. This won't be a quiet settlement. If we file this complaint, it becomes public record. You will be accusing your father and your aunt of fraud. The town will know. The employees will know. It will be brutal. You will be destroying his reputation permanently. I hung up the phone and looked at Ryan. $15 million, he whispered. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our rusted sedan in the driveway. Stella, he said, turning back to me, I know you are hurting. I know you feel betrayed. But look at us. We are drowning. We can't afford Ellie's dental work. We are one bad month away from bankruptcy. It is blood money. Ryan, I said, it is your money, he countered. It was intended for you. Your grandparents wanted you to be safe. They wanted you to have choices. Instead, your dad used it to build his own kingdom. Why should we suffer in poverty while he plays the benevolent business owner he is not playing? I said, feeling that strange, painful defense of my father rising up again. He worked hard. Ryan, he did build that company. With your bricks? Ryan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He built it with your bricks. You have a right to reclaim the house he built with your materials. I knew he was right. Logically, legally, morally, he was right. But the thought of standing in a courtroom, pointing a finger at the man who had carried me on his shoulders, made me feel like I was the one committing a crime. At noon, a black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. I watched from the living room window as my aunt, Colleen Hart, stepped out. She was a sharp, angular woman, unlike Dad, who had softened with age. Colleen had hardened. She wore tailored suits and kept her hair dyed a severe, dark brown. She was the business brain of Hayes and Hart. Dad was operations. Colleen was finance. She didn't knock. She used her key, a key I hadn't known she had, and walked right in. Where is he? She demanded, dropping her purse on the entryway table. I stood in the doorway of the living room, my arms crossed. He is not here, I said. I kicked him out. I know that. Colleen snapped. He slept on my sofa. He is a wreck. Stella, I haven't seen him this bad since Marion died. What do you think you are doing? I'm finding out the truth. Colleen, or should I call you co-conspirator? Colleen's face tightened. She walked into the living room and sat down on the edge of the sofa, smoothing her skirt. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed. You are being dramatic, she said. You found some old papers. Congratulations. I found the tape. I said, that stopped her. She froze, her hand halfway to her pearls. Marion's tape, she asked quietly. I nodded. I watched it. She told me everything. The biology, the deal, the trust, and I saw your signature on the amendment. Colleen, you helped him steal it. Colleen let out a long, ragged sigh. She slumped back against the cushions, the veneer of the high-powered executive cracking just enough to show the tired woman underneath. It wasn't stealing. Stella, she said. Though her voice lacked conviction, it was survival. Do you have any idea what it was like back then? Thomas was drowning. The bank was threatening to foreclose on this house. You were a baby. Marion was a mess, crying every day. And those Prestons? She spat the name like a curse. They sat in their mansion in the capital and judged us. They had millions, and they wouldn't lift a finger to help Thomas unless he begged. They wanted to control him. They wanted to own him. So you decided to rob them instead, I asked. We decided to use the resources available to save the family, she insisted. That land was sitting there, doing nothing. A vacant lot full of weeds. Thomas had a vision. We turned dirt into a multi-million-dollar business. We created jobs. We built a legacy for whom I asked. Not for me. I paid for my own college. Colleen, I drove a car with no heat for 3 years. Colleen looked away. She bit her lip. We lost track. She admitted softly. The plan was always to pay it back. To put the principal back into the trust before you turn 30. But the business is cash hungry. Every time we made a profit, we reinvested it. New trucks, new warehouse. Then the recession hit. Then Marion got sick. She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. I knew Thomas wouldn't do it. She said, "He is too proud and too scared," but I couldn't sleep sometimes. She opened the checkbook and ripped out a deposit slip. Handing it to me, I took it. It was for an investment account at a brokerage firm I didn't recognize. The account holder's name was Stella Hayes. "What is this?" I asked. "I started it 10 years ago," Colleen said, looking at the floor. "Every month. I took 5% of my draw from the company and put it in there." I didn't tell Thomas. He would have seen it as an admission of guilt. But I wanted there to be something for you. I looked at the balance printed on the receipt. $240,000. It was a lot of money. More money than I had ever seen in one place. But compared to the $15 million Jenna had estimated, it was pennies. It was a tip. "This is guilt money," I said, my voice shaking. "It is a start," Colleen cried. Standing up, "It is $250,000. Stella, take it, use it, buy a house. Just stop this crusade. If you sue us, you burn it all down." I stared at her. $240,000 to buy my silence, to wash away 30 years of deceit. I tore the deposit slip in half. "I don't want your scraps." "Colleen," I said, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. "I want what is mine." Colleen looked at the paper on the rug. Her face went pale, then red. "You are just like your grandfather," she hissed. "Cold, arrogant. You think justice is a calculator." She grabbed her purse and marched to the door. "Thomas is coming back tonight to get his heart medication." She threw over her shoulder. "Try not to kill him before the lawyers get paid." Colleen was right about one thing. Dad did come back. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. The summer sun was still lingering, casting a golden, deceptive glow over the neighborhood. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes with a ferocity that threatened to break the plates. I heard the front door open. I froze. Dad walked into the kitchen. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of old parchment, and he was sweating. Despite the air conditioning, he was wearing the same clothes he had left in the day before, now rumpled and stained. "I just need my pills," he said, his voice hoarse. "They are in the cabinet." He walked past me to the spice cabinet where he kept his beta blockers and blood thinners. He fumbled with the bottle, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't get the cap off. "Here," I said instinctively. Reaching out, "No," he barked, pulling the bottle away. "I can do it." He managed to pop the cap. He dry swallowed 2 pills, leaning heavily against the counter. "I was terrified you would look at me and see—" "Nothing, just the guy who paid the bills. I looked at you and saw my hero," I yelled back. "That is what kills me." "Dad, you were my hero, and it was all a lie. It wasn't a lie. The love wasn't a lie." He took a step toward me, reaching out. Suddenly, he stopped. His eyes went wide. His hand flew to his chest, clutching his shirt. "Dad," I said. He made a sound, a terrible, wet gurgle, and his knees buckled. "Dad." I lunged forward. Catching him before he hit the linoleum, he was heavy, dead weight. I slid down with him to the floor. "Ryan," I screamed. "Ryan, call 911. Dad was gasping for air, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. His eyes were unfocused, panic swimming in them. "Stella," he wheezed. "Stella, don't talk," I sobbed, ripping his collar open. "Just breathe. Ryan is calling." "I am sorry," he gasped. "I am sorry." His eyes rolled back, and his body went limp in my arms. The hospital waiting room was a place of suspended time. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency. I sat in a plastic chair, staring at the scuff marks on the floor. Ryan sat next to me, holding my hand so tight his knuckles were white. It had been 3 hours. A doctor in blue scrubs finally pushed through the double doors. Family of Thomas Hayes. I shot up. I am his daughter. He is stable. The doctor said. I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding since the kitchen. It was a myocardial infarction. But we caught it early. We placed a stent. He is in the ICU for observation. But the prognosis is good. He is lucky you were there. Can I see him? I asked. Briefly. The doctor said. He is sedated. But he can hear you. I walked into the ICU room. It was cold and smelled of antiseptic. Dad was lying in the bed, hooked up to a dozen wires and tubes. The steady beep, beep, beep of the monitor was the only sound. He looked so small. The imposing, terrifying figure who had dominated my life and my fears for the last week had evaporated. In his place was just an old, frail man with a broken heart and a bad ticker. I stood by the bed. I didn't take his hand. I just looked at him. I was furious with him. I hated him for what he had done. But watching his chest rise and fall, I realized with a sinking feeling that I still loved him, and that love was now a weapon he could use against me. The door opened behind me. It was Ryan, carrying Ellie. I told them not to bring her. I whispered. She insisted. Ryan said softly. She wouldn't go to sleep. Ellie wiggled out of Ryan's arms and walked up to the bed. She wasn't scared of the wires or the machines. She looked at Grandpa with a solemn, ancient expression. She reached out and patted his hand, careful of the IV line. Grandpa, she whispered. Dad's eyelids fluttered. He groaned low in his throat. It is okay. Grandpa, Ellie said, her voice clear and bell-like in the quiet room. Grandma says it is okay if the locked thing opens now. She says she is not mad anymore. Dad's eyes opened. They were groggy, clouded with drugs. But they locked onto Ellie. Marion, he rasped. No, it is Ellie, she said, smiling. But Grandma is here. She says you can rest now. The secret is out. Dad let out a long, shuddering sigh. A tear leaked from the corner of his eye and tracked into his gray hair. He closed his eyes again, his breathing deepening into a rhythmic sleep. I looked at my daughter. The hairs on my arms stood up. Ellie, I whispered, did you see her? Ellie looked at me, looking like a normal 5-year-old again. No, Mommy, I just heard her, in my head, like a song. Ryan put his hand on my shoulder. We should go. Let him sleep. We returned to the house at 2 a.m. I was exhausted, but my mind was wired. I went back to the dining room. The safety deposit box contents was still scattered on the table where I had left it during the confrontation. I sat down and began to organize the papers. I needed to put them in order for Jenna. As I was stacking the yellowed envelopes, I noticed something I had missed before. Tucked inside the fold of the original trust agreement was a smaller, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax-old, cracked red wax. The front was addressed in shaky handwriting. To my granddaughter. Whoever she is. I recognized the handwriting from the letter to Marion. It was Arthur Preston, my grandfather. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy linen paper. My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this, then 30 years have passed, and you are a grown woman. I will never know your name, or the color of your eyes, or if you have your mother's spirit. I am dying, and I am leaving this world with many regrets. The greatest is that I failed your mother. I tried to control her. I tried to mold her into a Preston, and I drove her into the arms of a man I did not respect. And now, I fear I have failed you too. I know what Thomas has done. I know about the amendment. I signed it because your mother begged me, and because I was too weak to fight them both. But I have left this letter as a reminder, a voice from the grave. This money was never meant to be a leash. It was meant to be a ladder. I wanted to give you choices, not chains. I wanted you to be free to be whoever you are, not who your family needs you to be. If Thomas has used this money well, then forgive him. If he has wasted it, then pity him. But do not let this legacy destroy you. Money is just a tool. Justice is a spirit. Choose the one that lets you sleep at night. Your loving grandfather. Arthur, choices, not chains. I put the letter down. Tears blurred my vision. Arthur Preston hadn't been the villain my father painted him to be. He had been a flawed man trying to protect his family, just like Thomas. They were mirror images of each other, two men fighting for control. Using me as the battlefield, the phone rang. It was the landline. It rang loud and shrill in the quiet house. I looked at the clock. It was 7 a.m. I picked it up. "Hello, Stella. It is Marcus. Marcus Gentry." I knew the name. He was the chief accountant for Hayes and Hart. He had been with the company for 20 years. "Marcus," I said, "it is early. I know. I am sorry," he said. He sounded panicked. "I heard about Thomas. Is he okay?" "He is stable." I said, "Thank God. Look, Stella, I am calling because, well, rumors are flying. Colleen was in the office at 5 this morning. She is shredding things. She is talking about liquidation." My stomach dropped. "She told me you are suing." Marcus said, "She said you are coming for the assets." "Stella, is that true?" I didn't answer. "Stella, you have to understand," Marcus continued, his voice pleading. "We have 52 employees on payroll, drivers, warehouse guys, dispatchers. Most of them live paycheck to paycheck. If you freeze the assets, or if you demand a payout that size, the company folds. We can't sustain it." "I know," I whispered. "These are good people." Marcus said, "Jimmy in dispatch just had twins. Sarah in accounting is paying for her mom's chemo. If Hayes and Hart goes under, this whole town feels it." "I know. Marcus, I wanted you to know what is at stake," he said. "It is not just Thomas. It is all of us." He hung up. I sat there holding the dead receiver. The sun was fully up now, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I looked at the legal complaint Jenna had drafted, sitting in a folder on the table. It was a weapon, a nuclear weapon. If I signed it, I would get justice. I would get millions. I would secure Ellie's future forever. But I would destroy my father. I would destroy the company. I would put 50 families on the unemployment line. Choose the one that lets you sleep at night. I looked at the brass key. I had opened the locked drawer. I had found the truth. But now, I had to decide if the truth was worth the price of everything else. The email from Jenna Rowe arrived at 6 a.m. on a Thursday. It had a sterile, terrifying subject line. Hayes versus Hayes Hart. Draft complaints and settlement options. I opened it on my phone while sitting on the back porch, watching the mist rise off the grass in the backyard. The house was silent. Dad was still in the hospital, scheduled for discharge later that morning. Ryan and Ellie were asleep. I scrolled through the PDF. It was 30 pages of legal devastation. Jenna had outlined 3 paths. Path A was the nuclear option, a full civil lawsuit filing for fraud, conversion, breach of fiduciary duty, and unjust enrichment. We would sue for the current value of the land, the disgorgement of all profits derived from the distribution center lease over the last 20 years, and punitive damages. The estimated recovery was between $12 and $18 million. The consequence was the immediate bankruptcy of Hayes and Hart Logistics, the liquidation of all company assets, and the personal bankruptcy of Thomas Hayes and Colleen Hart. Path B was the settlement. We would file a private demand letter, threatening the lawsuit but offering a structured buyout. The company would pay me a lump sum of $2 million now, and 20% of all future profits for the next 10 years. The consequence was that the company would survive, but it would be crippled by debt. Dad and Colleen would lose their retirement security. They would be working for me until they died. Path C was the ghost option. I sign a waiver releasing all claims. I accept the $240,000 Colleen had squirreled away. I walk away. The company stays intact. My father keeps his reputation. And I go back to my rented condo and my mounting bills, knowing that I bought my family's peace with my own inheritance. I put the phone down on the patio table. The metal was cold against my palm. $12 million. It was an abstract number. It was the kind of number you hear on the news. But when I tried to translate it into reality, it became concrete. It was Ellie's college tuition, Paid in full. It was a house with a yard and no mortgage. It was the ability to never worry about a grocery bill again. But it was also the sound of 52 termination notices. It was the image of my father. At 71, standing in a courtroom while a judge called him a thief, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, holding a boulder. If I dropped it, I would crush the people below. If I held on to it, the weight would eventually drag me over the edge with it. Ryan found me there an hour later. He brought 2 mugs of coffee. He sat down opposite me, his face drawn and tired. He looked at my phone on the table. "Did you get it?" he asked. I nodded. "And option A is $18 million. I said, "Option B is $2 million and a payout over time. Option C is nothing." Ryan took a sip of coffee. He didn't look at me. He looked at the oak tree in the center of the yard, the one Dad had built a swing on when I was 6. $18 million? He repeated softly. "If we do that, Ryan, the company dies." I said, "Dad loses everything. He stole everything." "Stella," Ryan said. His voice was calm, which made it scarier. "He stole it 30 years ago. He has been living on borrowed time and stolen money ever since. You are not killing the company. The company was born dead. It is a zombie, walking around on your legs. That is a business. Ryan, those are people. Marcus called me. He said 50 families depend on those paychecks. And what about this family?" Ryan asked, turning to face me. "What about Ellie?" "We are driving a car with a check engine light that I taped over because we can't afford the diagnostic fee. We are living in your dad's house because we couldn't make rent. Do you think Marcus's family cares about that? Do you think Colleen cares?" "They didn't know," I whispered. Colleen knew. Ryan snapped. "She signed the papers. She has been driving a Lexus for 10 years while you took the bus." He stood up, pacing the small patio. "I am not a greedy man. Stella, you know that. I work hard. I don't ask for handouts. But this isn't a handout. This is justice. Your grandparents wanted you to be safe. They gave you a shield. Your father took that shield and used it to build a roof over his own head while he let you stand in the rain." He stopped in front of me, leaning down, his hands on the table. "You have a duty," he said intensely. "You have a duty to your daughter. If you walk away from this money because you are afraid of hurting the man who lied to you for 3 decades, you are not being noble. You are being a victim." I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of poverty, the fear of failure. It was the same fear that had driven Thomas Hayes to steal the money in 1992. "It is not that simple," I said. "It is exactly that simple." Ryan said, "He bet on you never finding out. He lost the bet. Now he has to pay the debt." He picked up his mug and walked back into the house, leaving me alone with the mist and the morning birds. We brought Dad home at noon. He was quiet in the car, moving with the slow, careful fragility of a man who suddenly realizes his own mortality. We got him settled in the downstairs bedroom. I fluffed his pillows. I put his water on the nightstand. He looked gray against the white sheets. "Thank you," he whispered. I didn't answer. I just adjusted the blinds. "Stella," he said. I stopped at the door. "Yes. Can we talk?" "Just for a minute?" I hesitated. My instinct was to run. I didn't want to hear more excuses. I didn't want to hear about the market crash or the recession or his pride. But I turned around and sat in the chair by the bed. I talked to Colleen. He was staring at the ceiling. She told me about the account, the $200,000. She offered it to me. I said, I tore up the deposit slip. "Good," he said. I looked at him, surprised. It was an insult. He murmured, "It was hush money. You deserve better than that." He turned his head to look at me. His eyes were watery. The blue irises faded with age. "I know what Jenna is drawing up," he said. "I know how these things work. You have a case. A winning case." "Yes," I said. "I do. If you sue," he said, his voice steady. "I won't fight you. I told Colleen this morning, if Stella files, we fold, we liquidate. We give you every dime we can squeeze out of the bricks and the trucks. It won't be 15 million legal fees and debts will eat some of it, but it will be enough. It will set you up for life. And the employees, I asked. He flinched. That is the hard part. But that is not your burden. Stella, that is mine. I built a house on sand. I can't blame the tide for coming in. I sat there, studying his face. He looked resigned. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy pack he had been carrying for 30 miles. Why, Dad, I asked, and I don't mean the money. I mean, me. He blinked. What do you mean, the biology? I said, you knew I wasn't yours. You knew I was another man's child. Every time you looked at me, did you see him? Did you see the betrayal? Was I just a transaction to you? A way to get the capital you needed? No. The word came out as a sob. He tried to sit up, wincing as he pushed against the mattress. No, Stella, never. He reached out a shaking hand. I didn't take it, but I didn't pull away. The money was the transaction. He said, urgency returning to his voice. The money was the deal I made with the devil so I could keep you. But you were never the deal. You were the prize. He fell back against the pillows, breathing hard. Do you remember when you were 7, he asked? You had that terrible fever. Scarlet fever. You were hallucinating. The doctors were worried. I remember. I whispered. I stayed in that chair. He pointed to the corner. For 3 nights. I didn't sleep. I held your hand. And I prayed to a God I didn't believe in. I promised him that if he let you live, I would be the best father in the world. I promised him I would never let you go. He looked at me, tears spilling over his cheeks. When you rode your bike into the mailbox and broke your arm, I felt that break in my own bone. When you went to prom with that boy I hated, I sat up all night in the kitchen with a baseball bat, just in case he hurt you. When I dropped you off at college and drove away, I had to pull over on the highway because I couldn't see the road through my tears. He shook his head. I stole the money. Stella, I am a thief. I am a liar. I am a coward. But I am your father. Biology is just chemistry. Being a dad is showing up. And I showed up. Every single day. I showed up. I looked at his hands, the hands that had bandaged my knees, the hands that had signed the fraudulent documents, the hands that had built a company and stolen a future. They were the same hands. I didn't know how to reconcile that. I didn't know how to hold 2 contradictory truths in my heart at the same time, that this man loved me more than anything, and that he had robbed me to prove it. I stood up. Rest, Dad, I said. I walked out of the room before he could see me cry. I went upstairs to the spare room. The door was open. Ellie was inside. She was sitting on the floor in front of the wardrobe. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced around her like tiny spirits. She wasn't playing with dolls. She was just sitting there, staring at the dark wood of the antique cabinet. Ellie, I said softly, what are you doing? She looked up. She smiled. It was a bright, unburdened smile. It is not scary anymore. Mommy, she said. I walked over to her. The wardrobe loomed over us, heavy and silent, the scene of the crime, the hiding place of the key. What isn't scary? I asked. The locked one, she said. She pointed to the center compartment, the one I had opened with the brass key, the one I had found empty. Grandma unlocked it, Ellie said. I frowned. Honey, I unlocked it. Remember, it was empty. No, Ellie said firmly. You unlocked the door. Grandma unlocked the heavy part. Look. She reached out with her small hand and pulled on the little brass knob of the compartment door. It swung open. It was empty. Just the dark, dusty interior. See, I said, empty. No, Ellie said. Look up. She pointed to the ceiling of the small compartment. I crouched down, peering inside. It was shadowed. I reached in, running my fingers along the top of the inside of the box. My finger brushed against something. Paper. It was tucked into a tiny sliver of a gap between the molding and the top panel, a place you would never find unless you were looking up from the perspective of a 5-year-old. I pinched the edge of the paper and pulled. It slid out, a small, square photograph. It was old. The colors shifted toward magenta with age. I held it in the shaft of sunlight. It was a picture of my mother, Marion. She was young, her hair wild and curly, sitting on the front porch of this house. She was holding a baby. Me. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking down at me with an expression of such fierce, terrifying love that it took my breath away. And on the back, in her handwriting, "For when she is ready," I stared at the photo. She hadn't hidden money in the wardrobe. She hadn't hidden documents. She had hidden this. Why? Because the money was the complication. The money was the poison that had infected our family, that had turned parents into conspirators and grandparents into enemies. But this photo, this was the truth that existed before the money. This was the bond. For when she is ready. Ready for what? Ready to understand that love is not a transaction. Ready to understand that families are messy, broken, beautiful things that cannot be balanced on a ledger. "Mommy, are you crying?" Ellie asked. I wiped my eyes. "A little bit. Bug." Ellie patted my knee. "It is okay. Grandma says she loves the picture too." I pulled Ellie into my lap, holding her tight, smelling the strawberry shampoo in her hair. I looked at the wardrobe, then at the photo, then at the door leading out to the hallway where my father lay sleeping. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I drove to Carver Falls alone. Ryan offered to come, but I told him I needed to do this by myself. He kissed me goodbye, his eyes anxious, searching my face for a clue as to what I had decided. I didn't give him one. I couldn't. I was still carrying the boulder. The drive was 40 minutes of winding country roads. I passed the old Miller's Creek where Dad used to take me fishing. I passed the high school where he had cheered for me at graduation, his voice booming over the crowd. I passed the massive distribution center off the interstate. I slowed down as I drove by. It was huge. A sprawling complex of concrete and steel, surrounded by a sea of semi-trucks bearing the logo Hayes Hart. I looked at it. That was my inheritance. That was the steel and concrete manifestation of my grandfather's money and my father's ambition. I saw the men in orange vests walking across the loading dock. I saw the security guard at the gate. I saw the cars in the employee lot. Fords, Chevys, Toyotas, not luxury cars, commuter cars, car seats in the back. I gripped the steering wheel. If I signed the papers in the folder on the passenger seat, this would all cease to exist. The trucks would stop, the lights would go off, the weeds would return, but I would be rich. I would be justified. I turned my eyes back to the road and drove on. Jenna Rowe's office was in a glass building downtown. Her conference room overlooked the river. It was a space designed for serious decisions, mahogany table. Leather chairs. Silence. Jenna sat across from me. She had arranged the documents in 3 neat piles. Pile A, the lawsuit. Pile B, the settlement. Pile C, the waiver. She looked professional, detached, but her eyes were kind. "You don't have to rush. Stella," she said, "this is the biggest decision of your life. Once we send one of these, the machine starts. There is no unringing the bell." I looked at the piles. I reached out and touched pile A. The paper felt cool. "This one destroys him." I said, "Yes," Jenna said, "but it recovers the most value, and it is legally sound. He committed fraud. Stella, that is a fact." I moved my hand to pile B. "This one cripples him." I said, "It holds him accountable." Jenna corrected, "It forces the company to pay for its creation. It keeps the doors open." But barely. I looked at pile C. "The waiver. This one lets him get away with it." I said. Jenna nodded slowly. "Legally, yes. It absolves him. It validates the theft." I sat back in the chair. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vent. I closed my eyes. I saw Ellie running in the backyard of a house we owned. I saw Ryan sleeping soundly, no longer worried about the car breaking down. I saw the check for $12 million. Then I saw Thomas in the hospital bed. I saw the fear in his eyes when he thought he was losing me. I saw the photo of my mother, looking at me with that fierce love. Choices, not chains. Arthur Preston had written, "Money is just a tool. Justice is a spirit." I opened my eyes. I reached into my purse and pulled out the photo of Marion and me. I set it on the table next to the documents. I looked at Jenna. I am not my father, I said softly, and I am not my grandfather. I am not going to let money define who I am. I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen. I looked at the 3 piles one last time. The anger was still there. The betrayal was still there. It burned in my chest like a coal, but beneath it, there was something else, a realization. If I sued him, I would be doing exactly what he did. I would be prioritizing money over family. I would be destroying a life to secure a future. I would be continuing the cycle. I pulled one of the documents toward me. I didn't look at Jenna. I looked at the signature line. My hand shook. The tip of the pen hovered over the paper. The black ink waited to flow. I took a deep breath. I thought about the 50 families. I thought about the man who held my hand when I had scarlet fever. I thought about the woman who hid a key to save me, and a photo to remind me. "Grandma," I whispered, the sound barely audible in the room. "I hope you understand." I lowered the pen. The screen cuts to black. We hear the sharp, decisive scratch of a signature. Then, silence. Thank you for listening to She Said Don't Open the Locked One, Daddy. This story explored the tangled roots of family, betrayal, and the terrible weight of secrets. I would love to know what you would have done in Stella's shoes. Would you have signed the lawsuit, or would you have chosen mercy? Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from and share your thoughts on the ending. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more dramas about the dark side of human nature. Until next time.